Welcome to the Eco D2C podcast, where we break down the growth strategies behind successful natural and eco-focused companies. I'm here with Bena of Maggie's Organics. Bena founded Maggie's Organics some time ago. It's the oldest living organic apparel company in the U.S. She's been given the Special Pioneer Award by the Organic Trade Association and was voted one of the 25 people who most influenced the organics industry. Bena, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Luke?
I'm doing fantastic. Before diving into all these topics, can you tell us something about yourself that most people don't know?
Yes. Interesting question. I guess most people don't know that I'm a clothing entrepreneur who never really liked clothes. To this day, when I run into college roommates and they find out I'm actually selling clothing, they're like, but you're the person who always took off their clothes at the drop of a hat. It's like I was never really that into fabrics, but here I am, and I love it.
And for those who are unfamiliar, can you tell us a little bit about your company?
Sure. So Maggie's Organics started in 1992, and we, through an accident, ended up marketing organic clothes, which I'm sure we'll talk about. We sell mainly organic socks. Socks are like 60% of our sales, and basic leggings for women. And we got into organic wool. We started with organic cotton, and now we sell 2 seasonal collections of women's clothing a year, getting into men's clothing, getting into new products. We sell through a plethora of natural product stores, as well as boutiques, fair trade stores, and we, of course, have an online presence as well.
And can you walk us through the timeline of your growth journey just a little bit, chronologically? I know that you guys have been around for a long time, but I'd love to hear just a little bit about the early days and how someone who has very little interest in clothes came to become such an influential force on organic apparel.
I don't know about that, but yeah, sure. So do you want to hear the story of how we started, or you just want to hear the growth first, and we'll go back to that?
Let's start with just the story of how it started, and then into the growth, if that's okay with you.
So I was in the organic food industry. It was the early 90s, and I was working for a company called Little Bear Organic Foods. We marketed organic tortilla chips. We launched blue corn tortilla chips. They were new. They were kind of fancy and special and whatever. It turns out blue corn is higher in iron and trace minerals. So we were trying to really market organic blue corn, and it was starting to really catch on. And we were selling truckloads of chips to grocery stores. That was just starting. And lo and behold, the chips started fading before kind of our eyes. Like when we first harvested these fresh masha corn chips, they produced this nice, rich, dark colored tortilla chips. And as we stored the grain in the grain bins during the course of the year, it got lighter and lighter and lighter. So by the end of the season, we were actually marketing gray chips and not blue chips. So we tried all these different things at point of production to make the corn keep its color, and nothing worked. So I was the VP of sales. I went on the inspection trip that year to the farmer, and I asked him at the breakfast table, literally, is there something you can do to help the corn keep its color? And he got this little gleam in his eye and said, oh, yeah, I know exactly what to try. I got this covered for you. So I kind of checked it off and went to my next issue. And what he decided to do was plant 200 acres of cotton into his crop rotation. So we started growing cotton the season before the corn. He has this theory about nitrogen and fixing and nutrients in soil. Anyway, all I knew is he was going to make the corn better. So he called me in the spring and said, my cotton's growing. And I said, great. And maybe we'll have better blue corn next year. And then he called me a month or two later and he said, this stuff's going to yield a crop. And I was like, okay, congratulations, good, another crop. And he was like, no, you're going to sell this for me, right? And so it was back in the day when the farmers you worked with, you pretty much were in sync with, and you pretty much sold what they grew. And so I was like joking, like, Jim, we sell food. There's no way we can market cotton. And he goes, but Bena, it's organic. And I was like, yeah, so what? You still can't eat it. And then we started researching cotton and finding out, it's the second most pesticide-laden crop in the world, all these nasty things about synthetics and clothing. And our eyes were just wide open. And we were like, we have to find a way to market this cotton. So my then partner, who had been my boss at Little Bear, invested a couple $100,000 in Jim's cotton, and we had absolutely nothing no idea of how to convert the raw fiber into the finished good, and no idea what we were going to make out of it. So we did a research project, found out how ridiculously complicated the production cycle in clothing is. There's like 6 to 8 steps. It takes like 2 months to make anything as basic as a t-shirt. And we were in way over our heads, and we had to hurry up and come up with a product because we had invested all this money. And so we came up with socks. Like, we literally came up with socks because there were sock knitters left in the US. The US apparel industry was already under duress and going offshore. And socks were something that were small. They were impulse driven. They weren't kind of sexy the way socks are now. They were like a basic next to skin garment. And frankly, because the only retailers we knew were natural products retailers, and we knew we could guilt trip them into carrying socks. So that's how we started.
And so early on, when you're, you guys are in over your head, you're trying to figure out, not only you're trying to figure out what product you're even going to sell, much less sell it. Was it your partnerships with those natural grocers that really, that was really crucial to
Absolutely.
selling at the beginning?
We showed up at the Natural Products Expo trade show, which still goes on today in Anaheim, California, in March. Only then it was called the Natural Foods Expo, which will give you a clue of how long ago that was. And we had this wall of socks behind us. And people were coming up to me like, oh, I heard you quit your Little Bear job. What do you do? Hey, wait a minute. What is that? What is that behind you? And I would be like, these are socks, but these are not just socks. They're organic socks. You know when you're wearing conventional cotton. And I'd like guilt trip them. And they'd be like this against the wall of the booth. And finally, it'd be like, fine, Bena, give me some socks. And then I'd go, okay, do you want half cushion crews or full cushion crews or ankle length or knee? And they'd be like, I sell organic tomatoes. Like, just give me a few socks. And that's how, if we hadn't had those relationships and we hadn't built relationships of trust from our food days, we never would have gotten off the ground. I mean,
interesting.
Natural products retailers are risk takers. They were then, I assume they are now. And, they just kind of sat alongside of us. They heard the rationale and they were like, yeah, I'll give this a shot. I'll try it out. What the heck?
And that was the stepping stone from leaving the job that you had then that sort of led you to discover, these missed opportunities, or at least this issue. And then you went all in on the socks.
Yeah, we went all in on the socks. I bought my partner out. We started selling organic cotton t-shirts. Literally, I give Bill Knutson the credit for this, but really because of Knutson Juices, because he came up to me at a trade show and said, hey, I sell organic juice. And I said, yo, I know this about you, Bill. And he said, wouldn't it be cool if I could advertise my organic juice with an organic t-shirt? And I was like, wow, t-shirts. I didn't even think about disposable commodity. The world has too many t-shirts. There's too many t-shirts in landfills. I thought about acres of land. I just wanted to convert as many acres of land from conventional to organic in cotton because it's such a huge crop.
So just out of curiosity, to go back to that first step at the expo, we all know the experience of going to expos, making a lot of contacts, giving out a lot of samples, and then the follow-up can either be great or it can be, not.
Yeah.
Were there any crucial partnerships that came out of that expo, or was there anything in particular that was it the expo that kickstarted you? Or was there another effort early on that really helped things grow? I know in the beginning like that, it's all a hustle, but were there any particular things that stood out?
Boy, this is a long time ago and they're really rattling some cobwebs in my brain. I would say the expo and the level of trust that retailers put in the fact that we were producing a good quality product and that they would try something really off the wall. The next thing that happened is I started beating down doors. So there was follow-up. People placed orders at the show and we got little sections and we started creating little racks and such. And then I started doing the follow-up and beating on doors, and people would always say to me, okay, look, first they'd say to me, look, okay, it sucks, but where do I put them? I'm a grocery store. So then I created these racks, and then they would say, great, where do I put the rack? Like, does this go in body care? Does it go in household? I mean, a lot of them didn't even have those sections back then. And so I would always say to the retailer, put it in produce. And the retailer would look at me and go, produce? What are you talking about? Produce, it's a sock. And I go, the woman who's shopping in produce, she's like looking for dinner. She's looking for color. She's looking for, her eyes are open. Her mind's expanded because she's looking to nourish her family. And so just put it in produce because that's where people have a headspace for new products. And I started putting racks in the produce department. And even though it sounded really crazy, I guess it would be called disruptive marketing now. Back then, it was just kind of called insanity. But it worked. It worked. And then I do have one story when Whole Foods, I don't know how many stores they had, but they had a store in Lincoln Park, Illinois that was like sort of a big store. It was right next to a liquor store. I remember that. And we were selling stuff to them. It was going okay. We had already started selling a little bit of clothing. And suddenly their sales just went through the roof. And I was like, whoa, what is going on? And they said, oh, John Mackey was in here and he saw the rack in produce. And he literally said, I can't believe we have this stuff in here. And he yanked it down and put it by the register. So John Mackey put something by the register, nobody's going to move it, and that's where our rack was. Well, then we started really cranking sales. And once we got a few retailers like that, I would, it's the old attrition thing. You start talking about one retailer and up to another retailer, and then everybody kind of jumps on it, and it just started going.
This is not the first or even the second time that we've had someone on this podcast who has talked about experimenting with where they are placed in retail as being really critical to different periods of growth, whether early on or even later in the game. It's an interesting trend to notice, especially as someone who focuses online, that the kind of experimenting, one of my takeaways from this is essentially that experimenting is crucial in all fields, even more traditional routes.
Yep, I agree. And years later, we got into wool. I can't remember this guy's name. I got to remember it because the first organic apple certifier in the state of California, Phil LaRocca, who has LaRocca Vineyards, is still an organic wine line. He came up to me at a show and said, I've got these sheep that I'm using in our fields because they eat the weeds and they leave the vineyards alone and blah, blah, blah. It was just when I was starting to look at other fibers like hemp. And I was like, wow, do you shear the sheep? And he said, well, yeah, of course. And I said, well, I'd like to get some of their wool. Do you have any of their wool? And so blah, 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 cut to the chase. We ended up launching a wool crew sock out of Phil's sheep's yarn. And then he ended up, as being the creative that he is, putting a little rack into his tasting room in his winery. So you talk about, really thinking out of the box and whatever. He was like, hey, these are my sheep that are like cleaning up the weeds in my field. And people who are drinking organic wine were obviously interested in organic products. And we've had that story happen so many times. And we had a bookstore at a spa on the East Coast put in our socks just because they thought people who were coming to do retreats would be interested in having their feet warm, and this is organic, and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that happens all over the place. It's really exciting when it works.
Interesting. And you said the present day socks still account for 50% of sales.
Yeah,
so,
about.
Have you guys kept with innovative placements and, what kinds of other products it's next to or paired with? Like, has that remained consistent over time, or did it kind of like hit a groove and just really sailed smoothly from there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say it probably hit a groove. I mean, we still sell to a lot of the NCG stores, a lot of the community-based grocery stores, co-ops, and they have our stuff oftentimes anywhere they can fit it, right? Next to a freezer, sometimes still in produce, whatever. But then as the stores have grown and the sections have grown of non-food products, oftentimes we're next to Foot Cream and whatever. And then when we just went back into Wegmans, which is a grocery store chain on the East Coast, they just put us in line with their sock set. So a lot of times when we grow into grocery, more traditional grocers, they put us in a logical set. And it's not so interruptive. But we still sell with little clip strips, and we still try to get initial placements anywhere that we think would be a logical spot. We'll do baby socks next to the baby food on a little clip strip or something like that.
And as the organic apparel market has matured and other companies have moved into the space, how has Maggie's strategy adapted? Early days, sounds like you guys are probably the only ones doing this, not only with organic socks, but also like putting socks next to tomatoes. How important was it to stay innovative, and how did Maggie's deal with that transition?
Uh-huh. So that's a really good question, because we've never been good at marketing, and we've never really, we've kind of been shy about what we do rather than out there. That's all changing now, but it's taken 27 years to change. And so as more competitors got into different spaces, that's where we kind of tried to always improve our quality and almost go back to our roots. It was like a real struggle for me as an entrepreneur to resist going into the planned obsolescence world of fashion. So, you know, you can talk about fast fashion, and a lot of people in the organic world talk about fast fashion as the enemy. Well, anytime you do kind of seasonal collections, anytime you say this skirt is this length this year and this length next year, you're buying into that whole thing. And so my struggle always was, how do we keep it as basic as we can, as affordable as we can, because that was always our niche as well, and still innovate enough to be considered an innovative company, right? And sometimes we've really succeeded at it, but there were a few years in the mid 2000s, I would say, when we were really regarded by a lot of people as this sleepy Midwestern company. You guys just aren't going with the trend. And I don't know, I just always tried to focus on our basics and make our basics even better. So there was a time when people looked at, we have this one silhouette of sock, which is a basic crew sock. It only comes in solid colors. It's 98% organic cotton. We do all these special things to make sure only organic cotton touches your feet. Like, they're a really, really good product, right? And so, but everyone was like pushing us aside, going, oh, you still have those basic solid colored socks. You know, it's so boring. You're so boring. And I even considered dropping them. We considered like saying, maybe this style is just like grandpa and it's just not trendy enough anymore. And we just kept to it and just kept trying to make it better and better and better. And now somebody just came up to me this morning and said, you know, our crew sales are up like 45% again. And this is just our silhouette. This is just what people come to us for. And so it's kind of, the world went crazy around us. We kept to our ideals. And we kept to our basics. And I think that's what kind of helped us through a lot of those ups and downs.
Can you give me an example of getting back to your roots, but at the same time being innovative and, you know, keeping with some of the trends and some of the things that are happening now in fast fashion? Can you give me an example of a time that you guys did that successfully? Of having the best of both worlds?
Yeah. So we expanded into clothing. You know, we were into this t-shirt thing for a while, and t-shirts move a lot of volume. Like an average American t-shirt uses a half a pound of cotton approximately, and about a third of a pound of chemicals. So obviously we were going to convert more acres by selling more t-shirts. So we started doing all these t-shirts, and then we were like, we need to get beyond this, because every time I was in a presentation, I'd ask how many people have too many t-shirts in their closet, and 90% of the room would raise their hands. So we wanted to go beyond that, but we didn't want to go into this planned obsolescence thing. So we developed, like, I think our first, I wouldn't call it designer item, but I would call it something that was a classic staple, was this woman's scoop top. It wasn't, I mean, it was rightly designed and a really good fabric and had a lot of stretch in it. And it fit people's body really well. Like, we paid a lot of attention to fit, but it was still classic. So we started, and then I had people for years just clamoring for these scoop tops, saying, oh, there's all these designer organic companies now, and you're the only basic scoop top I ever want to wear, because it feels good and it fits my body and whatever. So I think that's what, and we've done that numerous times. We went into a woven silhouette that was a cowl neck tunic. We put pockets in it. Now we're in our third iteration of it. People won't let us drop it. Like, we tried to take advantage of what we knew the female consumer really wanted, and be advised of and stay on top of trends, but not go into a trendy place, if that makes sense.
I think it does. And just to really quickly, when you talk about planned obsolescence and you talk about fast fashion, just to explain that for any listeners who are unfamiliar, that's when companies they're going through line after line after line of clothing, and they're not planning on sustainably having a long-term clothing line.
Yes, that's very accurate. They're designing things that are really being made to mimic super high-end fashion trends from runways quickly, and they're designed to actually fall apart. I mean, that's another part of the fashion world that a lot of people really don't think about. But when they say, "Oh, everything's made so cheaply now, and it just falls apart," that's on purpose a lot of times. I've had retailers actually come up to me at trade shows and say, "Can you make your socks fall apart faster?" And I've been like, "Isn't the point to develop something that lasts?" And they're like, "Yeah, but I don't turn them that quick, you know, like I want them to fall apart so people will buy more from me." And it's just, that's that whole cycle. And once I really got into t-shirts and I really figured out who was sewing the clothes we all wear, that's when our mission completely changed. And we used to be about saving acres, right, and converting acres to organics, and then we became about really kind of saving lives. I mean, the fashion industry just throws people in enslavement, and it's just such a terrible place to be, that it's all part of that cycle, right, of turning clothes quickly and making them fall apart.
I love the mission that you guys have. I mean, you've built worker-run cooperatives at scale.
Yeah.
Like that's a really difficult thing to do, especially in an industry that depends on turnover. At risk of asking just a super vague question, like how have you been able to execute on the social side of this effectively without sacrificing business?
Well, so first off, I hate to burst your bubble, but we have sacrificed business.
Okay.
We didn't build it, but we helped inspire it. Was in Nicaragua. We didn't intend to build a worker-owned cooperative, but I was seeing all these disenfranchised workers in the U.S., and I was losing contractors to bankruptcy. So nobody in the apparel industry, I don't care who you are, owns all their own factories, right? It's such a complicated production cycle. Everybody farms things out. And when you farm things out in the apparel industry, you're talking about ginning and spinning and knitting and dyeing and cutting and sewing. It's not just like one co-packer. Just to make this garment I have on, there's probably 6 co-packers, right? Or what the grocery industry would call co-packers. So I didn't intend to start a cooperative. I just intended, I met an NGO. I didn't even know what that meant. They were in Nicaragua. And I said, "Hey, can we build a sewing facility where every worker has a vested interest in our success?" Because they work on a line, and so if they're a sleeve hemmer, they only care about their sleeve hemming because they get paid by the piece. And so if they can make 800 sleeves hemmed in one day, they'll make minimum wage. And for every one they do above that, maybe they'll make 10 cents or 15 cents. So, excuse me, but damn it, they're going to get as efficient as they can at sleeve hemming. They could care less about the collar. So what ends up happening is you end up with this disenfranchised garment because all these workers are disenfranchised. So nothing comes together in a full piece. It just, you know, it's maybe the sleeves are really good and then the collar necks are terrible. So he said, this NGO in Nicaragua, Jubilee House, said to me, "Why don't we build a cooperative?" And I was like, wow, okay, that sounds pretty cool. Let's try that. So we went into it thinking we're gonna have this vertical supply chain. It's all gonna be worker owned. It's just gonna be amazing. And then we tried to put in a spinning cooperative and all this stuff. The whole thing crashed and burned. The reasons for that are probably too long to get into this, but we took a risk along with everyone else, and we gave them all of our sewing contracts. So we said to them, if you can build this organization where every worker has a vested interest in our success, we'll pull all our sewing contracts from all over the world. We'll just work with you. We don't want to work with anyone else. And we did that for a while. And we put women who were victims of Hurricane Mitch in sewing string top camisoles that they had no business knowing how to do. And we lost a lot of fabric and there were a lot of irregulars and whatever, but we just stuck to this thing, right? And then it all crashed and burned and we lost all of that interest, all of that effort just kind of went down the drain. So when you say, how were we able to do it? It was truly by trial and error. And it wasn't until we brought the concept home with a group of workers in North Carolina that have become Opportunity Threads, and we were their first customer, and they're worker owned, and we were their first customer and only customer for probably 2.5 to 3 years. And we learned enough from our failures that we were able to translate it into a success. And that's just that's when I really feel like we've changed lives, right? But it hasn't been through, it's just been through a lot of trial and error.
Just a quick question about the work that you did in Nicaragua versus the partner that you had here in the US. In between the lines, I seem to read that in Nicaragua, you're trying to do a more vertically integrated model, which is incredibly difficult to pull off, even in the best of circumstances. And then in the US, it seemed like you had this other partner that was already focused on this mission that you could then work with and use the lessons learned to really get an ethical production going. Is that accurate?
I think so. You know, I haven't thought about it in a long time, but we definitely had a partner in Nicaragua as well that was destined to help workers. They didn't have as much, they had a lot more experience on the ground with the farms. They didn't have a lot of experience in how to convert a product into a finished, a raw material into a finished product. So we learned a lot of lessons along the way. And yes, the people we partnered with in North Carolina, I think really took the project more seriously and had more experience in actually setting up worker-owned cooperative models that were industries. And maybe to a degree, there was more of an infrastructure for them to fall back on, right? So I don't know. I mean, there have been worker-owned models that have worked at the sewing level in other parts of the world as well. But this model in the US really worked well. And now there's a Detroit group that's trying to start another similar project, and they're talking to the group in North Carolina. I mean, there is a big buzz around this idea of workers being owners.
Do you think there's more infrastructure to source products ethically now?
In terms of raw materials or finished products, like clothing entrepreneurs, do they have more sources? Is that what you mean?
Anywhere along the supply chain. Do you feel like it's because, as you said, like a lot of this is farmed out, there's multiple steps to the process. Do you feel like there's more resources today to source a product ethically at different points in that supply chain, or even the entire thing ideally, than there was in the past?
I definitely think there are more resources, maybe because there have been more people who have tried, and because of this thing called the World Wide Web, we're a lot more connected than we used to be. So it's much easier to find people who have tried and failed, or tried and are almost succeeding in this kind of thing. It's not really any easier. And from a market perspective, there's more pressure than ever to be everything, right? To be ethical, to recycle everything, to have recycled packaging, to be sustainable, to treat workers right. There's more pressure on all of that, and there's also more pressure on the financial side from the market. I mean, there's more downward price pressure in apparel is a real thing, that if you're trying to run an ethical situation, you're up against like constantly.
I would love to hear a little bit about some of these moments where you turned catastrophe into opportunity. I know there's been obstacles that you've come against, and it seems like they've turned into some fairly serendipitous moments.
Sure. I'm trying, there's so many examples of that. I mean, I used to say that our people would say, how do you decide what products to launch? And I'd say, well, it's easy. We plan something and it fails, and so we have this excess fabric or whatever, and we have to plan something else. So like one example of that is we were selling a lot of tote bags. I mean, it makes sense. Back in the day, you sold t-shirts and you sold tote bags because people were all into this whole idea of printing their logos on tote bags. So we worked really hard with our Peruvian supplier to develop this fabric that was going to be perfect for tote bags. I mean, like for 9 months. And we got in, I don't know, 10,000, 15,000 yards of it, something that was like a large amount for us at the time. And it was going to somewhere in the southeastern United States where they were going to sew these bags. The fabric comes in, we get a roll of it at our office. Everyone's looking at it and, you know, high-fiving each other and like, ooh, this is great fabric. Well, it's so cool. It's taken us so long. And I look at it and I virtually start crying. And my production manager is like, what's wrong with you? Don't you love this fabric? I said, yeah, it's beautiful twill fabric if you're making an Oxford shirt. But it like sucks for, excuse me, but it sucks for tote bags. It's like mushy and, you know, it doesn't hold up. It's not stiff. It's not at all like it's supposed to be. And so I was like, I can't believe that I just let this happen. Like I spent so much money on this, and this is a disaster, a catastrophe. And he just looks at me and goes, well, maybe we should make Oxford shirts, kind of as a joke. And so lo and behold, we started making button-down Oxford shirts with like nice button collars, size men's garments. We didn't know anything what we were doing about sleeve length and all that stuff. And we got like Cafe Nora in Washington, D.C. was the first certified organic restaurant. And they started having all their wait staff wear them. And then we turned it into this whole thing where people were embroidering shirts then, and they showed up at trade shows with these cool organic cotton shirts. So it was a disaster that totally took us down this other path that we never even thought we could get to, right? And people still ask me for those Oxford shirts. It's been like years since we've made them.
So you get this fabric, you decide to make something else out of it. It sounds like almost on the spot. When this happened before with the socks, it sounds like it was a lot of, throwing spaghetti at the wall to see, where it would sell, and relying on your network to get those first orders, to get your foot in the door with retailers, things like that. Was it the same thing with the Oxford sweaters? Like, was there a network for you to tap? Did you have to go develop new contacts? I mean, it sounds like a phenomenal network from beginning to end here.
Yeah, well, it is, and it's growing every day, and that's another thing that saved us. But do you mean on the sales end or on the supply end? Because we didn't even know how to make an Oxford shirt at the time.
On the sales end.
Okay, so on the sales end, it wasn't as challenging because we had the organic food industry, remember, was where I was from, and it kept growing. So we went from selling T-shirts to Bill Knudsen and company to selling polo shirts to everybody, because it was kind of like, oh, we're going to show up at trade shows now with a collar. And then it was like, hey, isn't it time for an Oxford? I mean, aren't you guys to this level now with your companies that you're wearing three-piece suits and you want a nice Oxford shirt to throw underneath it? So the network didn't have to change. We just kind of had to drive it a little bit.
Okay, so there's momentum.
Yeah, there was momentum in that particular case. I mean, there's been other instances. We first launched tights, like footed tights, which are making a comeback now, but they've been all pushed aside for leggings. So we used to sell thousands of tights a year, footed tights. And then one year we got it early on. We got a guy left, 10,000 pair in the dryer too long. This guy was making our product in Costa Rica. And he left them in the dryer too long, and they became sort of like you couldn't feel it until you put them on, but there was no stretch in them. So I'm getting all these calls and all these returns that people are saying, I put this large pair of tights on my 9-year-old, and she blew them out at the hip. Like, there's something wrong with these. And I was wearing them going, they're fine. There's nothing wrong with them. So they looked the same, but maybe 1 out of 3 of them didn't have any stretch to them. So we had no way of catching it in quality control. And so we were selling there was Blooming Prairie then and a bunch of distributors. And we were, they were demanding these tights. They were selling really well. And we were like, and then they started calling us going, we're getting all these returns. So we opened it up. We finally figured out what happened, which took us 6 weeks. And then we just told them the truth and said, hey, 1 out of 3 pairs of these we've ascertained are going to blow. We don't know what to do about it. We started having their salespeople help us figure out. And I said, I can't afford to throw away these tights. I mean, I'm going to lose my company if I do this. So I got a lawyer involved who wanted to sue the guy, whatever. It was all this nonsense. And we ended up using the Blooming Prairie salespeople to create knee highs. It was our first knee high. So we cut them off, we made them into knee highs, and they helped us market them. Like they got behind it by saying, help Maggie's out. They're in this bind. You got to buy these knee highs. And we still sell knee highs to this day. I mean,
and they said that to the consumer, not just to partners, but to the consumer.
Well, to the retail natural food stores and co-ops that they sell to, as well as the consumers. Yeah, to both of them. I mean, we've done that a million times. We had a guy leave. We developed a yoga pant, which is still a really, really nice pant. And this woman called me up in tears on a Sunday and said, I'm going to lose my job. We cut them too short. Please take these pants. It was like 3,000 pairs or something. I was like, you can't have yoga pants that are too short. No, I will not take them. I will not take them. But we'll figure out a way to, to correct it. So we added a cuff on. Now, a yoga pant with a cuff is like, nobody has a yoga pant with a cuff. That's ridiculous. So we put this cuff on them. They got long enough. We took them to a trade show. By this time, we're selling in New York, and we're selling to boutiques. my sales manager, I'm like, you got to sell these yoga pants with a cuff. And she's like, well, hopefully nobody will notice because most of them are in black and blah, blah, blah. We have a boutique retailer from Seattle come to the booth, and she's like real picky, and she's usually, doesn't like anything. And she goes, oh my God, those are marvelous. I can't believe I love them so well, especially that little extra cuff detail that you put on. And so we're like behind the curtain laughing. And to this day, we still have a cuff on the yoga pants because she said, I can't believe the extra time you took to put this cuff on. And we said, yeah, it's a design feature that nobody has but us. And so we just turned it into a positive, and it became something that we kept in the line,
When it comes to retail partners and customers rallying behind you like that, what do you attribute that to? I can think of a lot of examples where that kind of error, 1 in 3, pants getting blown out that could spell the end of a lot of ventures. And not just because of the product, but because, losing partnerships. What factor was at play that made those relationships bind stronger instead of Maggie's losing credibility in those moments?
I think you're hitting on a really important thing that every entrepreneur needs to know. And that is that if you really start your business because you have a mission, or because you believe in something, or because you have integrity around something, that can be your biggest asset. And I think that you have to respect and honor your customers enough to let them know that. And it's one thing to let them know that by greenwashing or fairwashing or putting it out there in some marketing speak, but it's another thing to really let them know that. And so I feel that the way we've really developed those relationships is by having integrity when things do mess up. And by one of our missions is to connect the people who wear our clothes with the people who make our clothes, because I believe truthfully in my heart that if the people who wore our clothes and looked in the mirror and felt good about how they look knew the women who are sewing, and vice versa, if the women who are sewing knew those women, that the world would be a better place. I believe there wouldn't be any wars, because those two groups of people just need to know each other. And so in supporting our mission, part of that means explaining to our customer base, whether it's retailers, consumers, distributors, this is really complicated stuff. This is really hard. And oh, by the way, we're also trying to do it with an environmental bent. So we're not going to use a plastic thread that's maybe more durable. We're going to have to use a cotton thread. By including them, that's how you develop those relationships, because then they have compassion for your value system, for why you're in business in the first place. And I don't care if you're big into the green movement, or you're an eco this, or you're a fair trade that, or you're not. You just want a good pair of socks. Most people want to do things with integrity. Most people want to eat with integrity. Most people want to treat each other with integrity. Most people want to wear clothes and feel like they're not abusing the planet or workers. So I think that's a critical thing, that you just have to be vulnerable to your customer base and honest.
Do you think when it comes to the retail partners that you guys had at times like that, how much of it do you think was them, also believing in Maggie's mission, and how much of it was sales at that time of those products? What combination of those things do you think was at play there? Or is there something I'm not seeing entirely?
Like in the case of the tights and becoming knee-highs, those were definitely a sought-after product that we had trouble fulfilling orders. But in the case of these yoga pants, that was a whole new thing for us to do a yoga pant. And there were not maybe as many organic yoga pants out as there are now, but there were certainly no retailer needed to buy Maggie's bootleg yoga pants. There were plenty of other options for them. But that may have just been an accidental, hey, I do like this design feature. Oh, well, it was an accident that we were actually trying to cover our butts because we had made a big mistake. But it didn't matter, because at superficial level, it fulfilled what that retailer needed, or what that retailer wanted, which was something special. And that's the other thing in the apparel industry we have going for us is fashion is fashion. And I can say I'm not a fashionista, but people do want uniqueness. They want something they can tell other people about. They want to be early adopters. And if something's unique, that, they get to hang their hat on that. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So innovation in that way is very much incentivized in your industry.
Right. Yeah.
I know you're passionate about the independence movement in the natural space, as I've heard you refer to it. Can you tell us a little bit about that movement, where that passion comes from, and how you've remained independent during tough times, such as the '08 crisis?
Yeah, I feel like I am impassioned about independence because I feel like independent entrepreneurs are risk takers, and in any industry, risk taking is what makes change. And knowing what's going on in the world today, we certainly all need to find innovative ways to solve problems and to grow. And I just feel like if you're independent, you're going to be a lot more willing to do that, right? So in 2008, we had grown to the point where we were selling to a couple of big chains and one big distributor. And, it's the usual story that you hear in the natural products industry. They were strong, both of them. They were pushing us around and slapping us around a little bit. We were getting a lot of bill backs. We were getting returns from things that weren't even opened by, people would return orders and say this didn't sell, and we'd see the original tape on the box. So we were able to say, well, it can't sell if you don't take it out of the box. So yeah, so we were just kind of getting beat up. And then 2008 came, and those more chain type accounts were maybe 40% of our sales at the time, but they could have easily been 60 or 70% if we had let them. We were kind of trying to keep them at bay. And then the crash happened, and stocks tanked and people moved innovative product off their shelves. They went back to the basics. It was scary for a while. And our business went down, obviously, with those chain accounts. But because we were insulated by all these other independent stores and consumers, we went down, maybe if they went down like this, we went down like this. So our sales went down 20 or 30, I think 30% in 2008. And then we were able to build back up. And when we did start to build back up, I was like, we're going to have to really reinvent ourselves with independence and really stay in touch with community stores where they're community grocery stores like co-ops that we talked about before, whether they're independent food stores, bookstores, shoe stores, or whether they're independent boutiques. Because I just don't want to be beholden to these giants. And so now, we're going through a growth curve now. We're growing at like 24% a year, and we're getting more into different product categories and stuff. And there's this urge to get back in. There's always the big fish that you see, and you just, it's really great to look at, wow, I could get a distribution of 1,000 stores, and let's go for that. And we're still at the point where we're holding back from that a little bit. I mean, we're proceeding with caution. And I feel like that, again, if I was beholden to venture capitalists or people who had invested in my company, I'm sure my fiduciary responsibility would be to go for the biggest customer I can get, right? But because I'm independent, I don't have to do that.
You don't distribute through UNFI, correct? At one point you did, but now you do not. So entrepreneurs with small to medium-sized businesses who are, like getting into UNFI is a really big deal for a lot of people.
It is.
If they're more independent-minded, or if they'd like to be, do you think it's a wise choice to, if you're earlier stage, to say turn down an offer from UNFI or not go for it at all? And if someone is not trying to get into a bigger distributor like that, what strategy do you recommend they execute to stay alive?
It's a really good question. I mean, I can't speak to the world now and the pressure, and a lot depends on what product category you're in. I mean, we happen to have a light shippable product, so it's really easy for us to ship directly to retailers. It doesn't break, it doesn't have a shelf life, and those are all the advantages to being in clothing. But I would, with all due respect to UNFI, because they treated us very well, I would find their competitors, find their little niche distributor competitors, which there are some of, or find one chain store that works not through UNFI as primary, that works through another distributor, and try to talk to that distributor and see, is that something worth pursuing? We're selling to Wegmans now, which is a chain in Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, New York, of grocery stores that do a lot with natural foods. They're bringing in some product direct, they're bringing in some product through a distributor, but it's not UNFI. And so we're working both sides of that, and they've had success. We just relaunched with them, I think, this past fall, and they're having success with us. We're presuming they're going to keep adding products, et cetera, but we're still going to cautiously proceed, and we're not wild about proceeding with these big distributors. So I don't know if that helps. And Amazon's another one. It's the same type of question, right? We have sold to Amazon proliferarily. We just launched this year. We're selling to one of their biggest resellers. So we're going to start doing the whole Prime thing and all of that. And it's kind of a double-edged sword. I'm like, do I really want this to happen? Do I not want it to happen? Obviously their accessibility to every person in the US is pretty astounding, but then are they going to gain too much control? How are we going to keep things in check? I don't know if there's a simple answer to any of that.
So that leads right into my next question of what marketing channels today are currently the most important. You said that you're growing by 24% a year, which is amazing. What is contributing to that?
That's a really good question. So we, I think I said earlier that we kind of have the imposter syndrome, or have you heard of that?
Oh, totally.
Yeah. Okay. So that's been Maggie's, right? That's been the reason we haven't really put it out there marketing wise or whatever. And we played around with certifications early on. All of our products are organic certified or made with GOT certified ingredients. And we went through this whole fair trade certification. Do we certify? Do we not? We were one of the first Fair Trade USA people to get certified. Then we pulled back from the certification because we don't believe in it. And we were like, what else should we do? So we just went through the process of being certified by the World Fair Trade Organization, which is much bigger in Europe than it is here. And we're actually putting their symbol on our label. And we're through those kinds of decisions, it opens us up to a whole plethora of new independent retailers. So like the fair trade stores, and those stores, they're all small and independent. There's like 3 store chains or 4 store chains, but the rest of them are all small and independent. They have different needs, and you have different things you have to do to get ready to sell to them, but they're in a lot of aspects a lot easier than some of these big chain grocery stores. So I think that the whole independent thing is really important to us, and it's really important from like an esoteric level as well as just a return on investment level. We believe in, millennials are not, and even Gen Zers are not being handed anything in their lives, right? They're having to create their own realities. And so some of the institutions that I grew up with are just not, well, look at department stores. Department stores are barely hanging on, most of them. Malls are empty, right? And so millennials and Gen Zers are trying to find innovative ways to live their lives. And a lot of them are turning to these community-based stores, whether they're coffee shops that then put in a boutique, or whether they're fair trade stores or whatever they are. And we just want to tap into that market however we can. And I'd say that's really important to us as we grow. And of course, the whole B2C thing is really important to us. And as being who we are and not having marketed well, we are just entering a contract now with a marketing organization to really double our sales online over the next year. And listening to our retailers about what effect that has on them and trying to be sensitive to that as well. So those are, I would say, of all of the channels, we're looking for disruptive places to sell our products, like bookstores or spas or whatever. And we're looking for that whole direct consumer thing.
Okay, so it's a focus. Interesting. So the focus on independence, on independent smaller stores has been consistent, and it sounds like there's an upswing in the amount of business that a lot of these small places are getting. And so that investment over time has really paid off, and you guys are even expanding into more smaller independent retailers.
Right? It's expensive to expand into 20 2,500 small stores versus one larger store. But we're in it for the long term, and we really think that's a way to go. Yeah, we are doing it.
Are there any online channels that seem to have a particularly large amount of opportunity or have had a lot of success for you guys, or any ones that have been particularly challenging for you?
Those have gone in ebbs and flows, like most things. We, like I said about Amazon, we're just entering this whole new relationship now. I'll be able to check back in with you on that in 6 months. I don't know how that's going to go. And then we started a couple of the eco versions of Amazon, like the online retailers, and I don't know any of the names off the top of my head, but one's in Denver that we've been somewhat successful with and are trying to build on that success. These are more of the ethical shopper everything stores.
Is it Earth Hero in Colorado? They're based out of Boulder. Yeah.
Boulder. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't know the name. Yeah, so those have been, I mean, we've only been on them for maybe 6 months, but I think that's going pretty well. Mm-hmm. And they seem to be really the real deal. We're really looking for people who want to get behind the label and really help us tell our story, partly because we haven't been good at telling it ourselves, and partly just because, we honor that commitment that they're making.
All right. And final question, what's the next big step in growth for your business?
So we're calling 2020 the year of vision here. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we're going to leave it all on the table this year. We're like expanding into different categories that we never even thought we would be able to come close to. And I can't divulge some of them, but it's like wherever we see opportunity, we're kind of going for it. And so we're going to increase our product selection pretty dramatically over the next year and a half, 2 years. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where a lot of our growth is going to come from. We feel like our supply chains are really developed, and we spent a lot of time developing them. So we now have a supply chain in India. We're adopting a village, and we're going to start prepaying our farmers again in that village and really start growing their cotton selection. And we're going to keep that supply chain, keep our Peruvian supply chain, and of course keep our U.S. supply chain where 50%, all of our socks are made in the U.S. and they have been for 27 years. So we're going to keep that and keep just building on it. So I'd say most of our next big step is going to be about broadening our product selection.
Bena, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was great. It was great to talk to you. I learned a lot.
Until next time on the EcoD2C podcast. And Bena, thanks again.
All right. Take care, Luke. Bye-bye.